Imagine how our life could be if now we get this house Samuel and those 2 motor wey dey outside. All this expensive property, gold, phones and money for their account. Imagine, and e no hard to do. This thing wey I get for mind, e no hard. Na only them and us dey this house. You get power pass oga, I get power pass madam. Just fit buy them, take everything.
What she has, part 2. It did not take too long for us to execute our plan. We waited, watching, biding our time. And when the moment finally came, when the opportunity presented itself, we didn't hesitate. The night Oga came home drunk from his business dinner, I knew it was time. Madam had already gone to bed. I caught Samuel's eye, nodding to let him know that this was the time we had been waiting for. He was standing close to Oga, holding his laptop bag and an unopened bottle of whiskey, a takeaway from his dinner. It was the perfect weapon. Quickly, my husband struck. The heavy bottle came down on Oga's skull with a dull thud. I watched as it crumpled to the floor, blood pooling around his head, staining the pristine white floor tiles and Turkish center rug. I didn't feel sorry. I didn't feel anything except a cold satisfaction. This was what he deserved. As Oga fell to the ground, he shouted before going completely silent and still. Samuel, shocked that he had in fact done it, that he had taken another man's life, dropped the whiskey bottle. It crashed to the floor loudly and shattered, spilling its contents all over. Madame heard the noise and came rushing down the stairs. "Honey, why did you shout?" she began, but stopped in horror when she got into the living room and saw her husband lying there in a pool of blood, whiskey, and glistening glass shards. She opened her mouth to scream, but I was faster. I grabbed her by the hair and slammed her head against the wall, once, twice, until she stopped struggling, her body slumping to the floor not too far from her husband. Blood trickled down her face, mixing with the tears from her closed eyes. But she wasn't dead yet. I could see her chest rising and falling, her breath shallow and labored. I saw then that Ogatu was not yet dead. One of his legs was moving slowly, and he was making a strange, pain-filled sound. That made me feel pissed. They had to die, both of them, so that we could have it all. We dragged their bodies into the guest room, tying them up with ropes Samuel got from the garage. Madame tried to speak, her lips moving soundlessly, but I ignored her. I didn't want to hear her pleas. I felt zero empathy for her. Suddenly, she didn't look as pretty, flawless and standoffish as she usually does, not with all that blood on her face. We left them there, locked in the room, hoping they would bleed to death. It didn't matter how they died, just that they did. We cleaned up the blood in the living room as best as we could, scrubbing the floor until our hands were raw. When we were done, it was as if nothing had happened. The house was clean, pristine, just as Madame always wanted it. I went up to Tenny's room. She was still fast asleep in a pink-themed bed, unaware of all that had taken place. The little angel. I leaned over and kissed her cheek, my eyes filled with tears, tears of joy. You are all mine now. The next couple of days went by fast. Samuel and I surprisingly slipped into our new life easily and without remorse. We were living out our fantasy in real time. Now, the Oga and Mother of the house were us, owners and lords of all their possessions, parents to Tenny. We told the neighbors who saw us as we took Tenny to school in the morning after the incident that Oga and Madam had gone on a long, urgent trip abroad. They believed us, of course. Why wouldn't they? We were just the servants, loyal and obedient. Who would suspect us of anything? For a while, everything was perfect. I wore Madam's clothes, shoes, and expensive hair.
slept in her bed, and even spoke to Tenny as if I were her mother. I would twirl in front of the mirror, enjoying my new role as the mistress of the house. Samuel enjoyed it too. He drove a gas car, spent the money he found in the house, stacks of naira and foreign currency. We were living the life we'd always dreamt of. We threw away their SIM cards and sold their phones and laptops, then bought new iPhones for ourselves. This is the life. We tried repeatedly to hack their ATM card pins as well, but were unable to. But we were able to sell some expensive items in the house that we had no need for, and we amassed a huge amount of money in our own accounts. But then, things began to go wrong. We had hoped Oga and Madame would waste away quietly, and that hope actualized, with Oga being the first to die. His moans stopped one day, and when we went to check, he was cold and stiff, his eyes open but lifeless. Madame, though, was still alive, but she was not a much better sight. Her face looked dirty and dark. There was urine mixed with some weird substances around her, and she had also thrown up repeatedly with streaks of vomit dried out on her chin and nightie. I scrunched up my face in utmost disgust, wondering how she managed to still be alive. Apart from her injury, she had had nothing to eat or drink for 3 days. So how was she surviving? The smell in the room was unbearable, a thick clawing stench that filled up the whole place. Samuel wanted to dispose of Oga's body, but we didn't know how to go about it. So we wrapped him up in bed sheets, dragging him down the stairs. But as we tried to carry him outside, the nosy neighbor next door, Mrs. Okoro, saw us. She had been standing by our low fence just as we carried the body out. She started asking questions, her voice sharp with suspicion. Where did your boss and his wife travel to again? They usually let me know when they would not be around for some time. And the nosy witch stretched her neck, trying to see what we were depositing in the boot of Oga's Benz SUV. What is it that you people are carrying? We responded to her questions as briefly as we could, lying that it was some items Oga asked us to deliver to a business partner. We could tell that she did not buy it though. She kept staring at us as Samuel drove out with Tenny and I in the back seat, off to drop Oga's body in the lagoon. Samuel grew nervous. We need to come out for here, he said when we returned, his voice shaking. We don't get their money, moto. Make we just go before Kasala boss, that woman. I know say she could create wahala for us. But I wasn't ready to leave. I had everything I'd ever wanted right here. We know they go anywhere, I told him. This na our life now, and we go enjoy am. Mrs. Okoro no fit prove anything, no fear, Sam. But the next morning, Samuel was gone. He took everything, money, jewelry, anything he could carry, and Oga's SUV. He left me with nothing but the crumbling fantasy I had clung to so desperately. The house, which had once felt like a palace, now felt like a tomb. The walls seemed to close in on me. And Tenny, who used to look at me with love, now stared at me with confusion and fear. The stench from the guest room grew worse by the day. The silence in the house was suffocating, punctuated only by Tenny's cries now and again. I couldn't go near the room, couldn't bear to see what I'd done. The life I had envied, the one I had destroyed others for, had now turned into a nightmare. With no money and no Samuel, I was trapped in the very place I had once coveted. I tried to sell Madame's car online, but no buyer was forthcoming. They seemed not to take me seriously. The life that had seemed so desirable was slipping through my fingers, leaving me with nothing but the cold truth of what I had done. In the end, all I had was Tenny, and even she began to slip away from me. I could see it in her eyes. She knew something was wrong, that I wasn't the mother she loved, She cried constantly, and I had no words to comfort her, no lies to tell.
Eventually, the authorities came. Mrs. Okoro had called them, suspicious of the long absence of Oga and Madame. I was numb as they spoke to me, telling me they would be taking me in for questioning based on the reports from Mrs. Okoro. When they broke into the guest room, I heard them gasp collectively. Madame was still alive. Barely, but alive. Her body was a broken mess, her skin pale and clammy, but she hung to life with a desperation that terrified me. They rushed her to the hospital, and as I saw her being carried out, her eyes fluttering open long enough just to see little Tenny, the relief in her gaze was enough to shatter what was left of my resolve. They took me away after that, leaving the house that had once been my dream behind. As they led me to the police van, I glanced back at the house one last time, at the life I had stolen and lost. Madame would leave, would reunite with her daughter, and I would have nothing. I had tried to take what she had, but in the end, all I had was a shattered dream and the memory of what I had done to get it.